Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about terrorism, uh, but I'm going to be talking about a specific case of domestic terrorism and not just terrorism as a whole. But it is still important to know what terrorism is. And if you look it up as the Google definition, it is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. Um, and if you were to walk up to anybody on the street and ask them what they think terrorism is or a terrorist attack, a lot of people would probably say, at least in America, 9/11 being one of the biggest and most prolific cases of terrorism on American soil, committed by people from a different country, that being Al Qaeda. But domestic terrorism is a little different. It is the Google definition is the committing of terrorist acts in the perpetrator's own country against their fellow citizens. So, domestic terrorism is people who were born in the United States or came here to the United States and committed an act against United States citizens. Um, and the American University, the American Military University actually does a deep dive into what domestic terrorism looks like, some related incidents, but they call them homegrown violent extremists now. Instead of domestic terrorism is still the term used, but they also call them homegrown violent extremists, who just encourage, endorse, and condone, justify violent acts to achieve political, ideological, religious, social, or economic goals against America. But identifying a domestic terrorist isn't easy. It could literally be anybody. It could be a US born natural citizen. Interestingly enough, the American Military University does specify that most US born citizens, most domestic terrorists are actually members of US militia organizations, which is very interesting, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later into the video. But domestic terrorists could also be naturalized citizens, green card holders, foreign students, or just illegal immigrants. It could literally be anybody. It's just an attack on our home soil against people on home soil, is the best way of thinking about it. But jumping right into my case, which is the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, on April 19th, 1995, at around 9:02 a.m., the bomb went off. A 4,800-pound ammonium nitrate fuel oil bomb exploded in a Ryder truck that was parked at the north entrance of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma. When the bomb actually went off, it killed around 168 people, injured approximately 850, and it was reported that 30 children were orphaned, 219 children lost at least one parent, and 462 people were left homeless, and around 7,000 people lost their workplace. So it's important to note what was actually in the building. Um, there was a daycare underneath the actual building, which when you look at pictures, I'll show a picture right now, actually. There's a giant crater. I mean, the whole north entrance is blown off, but there's also a giant crater where the truck was, and that did hit the daycare. Thankfully, not a lot of kids were killed. There were kids killed, not a lot though. Thank God, but importantly, it is important to note that inside this building, there were companies, mainly security companies, that were doing just everyday, day-to-day work for people. They would outlet like third-party security for events and such. But also inside this building was the ATF. There was an ATF office in there, which is extremely important for why this building was chosen. So the main person who committed this terrorist attack, the one that everyone knows, it is Timothy McVeigh. He had a bunch of people help him with the bomb and a bunch of other like weapon transports to commit maybe even further terrorist attacks. I don't think he was going to stop here, but he did end up getting caught. I'll talk about that a little later. But Timothy McVeigh was the main perpetrator behind this, and he was a Gulf War veteran. And he had a lot of weird and disgusting views on war, and he hated America for even being in the Gulf War. He hated having to go. and the trauma of even being in a war is enough to have someone become like this. So when the American Military University talks about most domestic terrorists being U.S. militia members or part of organizations, Timothy McVeigh was. He was a veteran in the Gulf War. Um, he had a lot of militia culture, and he viewed the bombing as a justifiable attack against the federal government. And when it murdered innocents, that his goal wasn't to kill innocents, but he described that as just collateral damage. The main reason he attacked this building was because the ATF was in there. And why is he targeting the ATF? Well, he targeted the ATF for two big reasons, two big failures on the government before this bombing. I believe one of them was actually, I believe both of them were in 1992, 1990 and 1992, but it was Ruby Ridge incident, which the ATF took priority on, um, killing an entire family inside of Ruby Ridge. But that's a whole case for a whole different video. And Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians. The ATF also started that, and it turned into a hostage situation, and they actually went in and raided Waco. Um, After those federal agents got killed in that raid, it was later taken over by the FBI. But that Timothy McVeigh saw this and the failures of the government and the government impeding on civilians of America, and it just made him grow hatred towards the federal government. So he found the ATF building in Oklahoma, and it wasn't the ATF building; it was a federal building that housed an ATF office site, and that was the reason for his that was the reason that he targeted the Alfred P. Murrah building. Um, but interestingly enough, Timothy McVeigh got caught not easily. I don't want to say easily, but when the bomb actually went off, nobody had ever seen anything like this. This was the first real big terrorist attack, and it is still second in death count on American soil by domestic terrorist standards. Um, but a lot of reckless media accusations when it first happened started going against Islamic people, and a lot of Islamic hate and hysteria was going around against anti-Muslim hysteria throughout the nation, and it just couldn't be further from the truth of who actually committed this horrible act of terrorism. Um, but the way they found him was really interesting. The feds were on it immediately. They were trying to find the like Ryder truck parts, and when they did actually stumble upon a muffler, I believe it was, they found the serial number on the Ryder truck, traced it back to a place in Kansas, got a sketch on what Timothy McVeigh looked like, and from there they could actually find him. And I think he was driving another truck to somewhere else where he was going to commit another terrorist attack. I'm not completely certain on that. I wouldn't take my full word on that, but they did catch him using pieces of the Ryder truck and serialized numbers because that's what he used to actually blow up the building. The bomb was inside of the truck. But once he got caught, Timothy McVeigh had a lot of people helping him. Two of the biggest ones were it was Timothy McVeigh, Michael J. Fortier, and Terry Nichols. They were all found guilty when they were indicted in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Oklahoma on August 10th. The charges were for conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, destruction by explosives, 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts including conspiracy to transport stolen firearms, and McVeigh was actually found guilty on every single count. So that is Timothy McVeigh's story, but it does actually translate into a lot of future domestic terrorist attacks. Just a couple I wanted to point out. Um, September 11th doesn't count, but in 2002 we had the Beltway snipers in Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., and in 2009 the Fort Hood shooting in Texas, both being federally targeted. And I don't actually know if um, domestic terrorists were U.S. militia members at all, but I do know that they were targeting federal government things for hate of America's federal government. Um, so it just goes to show that this case and Waco and Ruby Ridge does inspire a lot of people who have military background or just any kind of background. It inspires them to attack federal buildings all over America, and that has been foreseen in a lot of different attacks of domestic terrorism throughout the years. Another big one was the Boston Marathon bombing, but that wasn't on any kind of federal anything. That was a true terrorist attack just against civilians. It had nothing federally related to it. The last two I mentioned were the ones that I could find that were federally related. But that is all for today. I hope you guys learned something a little bit more about terrorism, domestic terrorism in particular, and a little bit more about Timothy McVeigh. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to him. He spent a lot of time making that bomb with a lot of different people, and that could be a whole video in itself. But just for today's video, I just wanted to talk about his case and a little bit about him. And hopefully now you all have a better understanding of what domestic terrorism looks like and how we're still fighting it today. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.